Kathleen Lowe, rapid fire intro in 1 to 2 sentences. Who are you?
I am Kathleen Lowe. I am currently based in Lisbon, Portugal. I am a full-time entrepreneur and part-time potter.
And how do you make money online?
When I first started doing the digital nomad thing, I ran a web design business with my husband. But for about a year now, we've shifted our focus to a new business called Border, where we streamline the process of moving to Portugal.
And what is your favorite thing about digital nomading?
I love how much you get to experience of a place that goes beyond like a standard 2-week vacation, experiencing new cultures and meeting new people.
And I feel like I'm going to know the answer to many of these answers here, but where are you now and what are your 2 to 3 favorite cities in the world?
I am currently in Lisbon. It is my second year here. 2 to 3 favorite cities. I love Chiang Mai, Thailand, and Taipei is also up there on my list.
No, Lisbon's not making the top 3?
Oh, I thought that was part of it. I thought that went without saying. Lisbon, Chiang Mai, and Taipei.
Fair enough.
Just to make it clear.
Okay. And what's your best concise advice for aspiring digital nomads?
Just do it. Go for it. Don't let anyone else, especially yourself, convince you otherwise or hold you back.
And what small change has made a big difference in your life?
Doing yoga every day. Started doing yoga every day in 2017, and it has definitely changed the way that I feel connected and in tune with my body.
And what is your favorite book?
The Alchemist is one that stands out. It was there for me at a very important crossroad in my life, so it does hold a very special place in my heart.
Love it. That is also my favorite book. So shout out to The Alchemist. And last rapid fire question for you is, if you had 20 seconds to live, what message would you share with the world?
That everyone has their own journey and to focus on your own path and not compare where you are at in life with others.
Awesome. Well, thank you for giving us a quick crash course on you and some of your thoughts. It's good to have you on here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I want to start with an overview of your digital nomad journey. When did you start? How has it evolved? Where have you been? Give us the broad picture of your journey.
Yeah, for sure. So my digital nomad journey started in early 2018. Prior to that, I was based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was running the web design business with my husband, Richard. We had been running it at that point for about a year and a half. And we realized that we never really met up with any of our clients. And so he had done some international things in the past. I had this itch to like travel and work. And when we realized that we never really met with any of our clients, we were like, oh, why don't we go give it a try? It was interesting because we actually didn't know that there was like a digital nomad community that existed prior to going to Chiang Mai, which was our first destination. But anyway, we sold all our stuff. We had planned for a year. We didn't want anything to hold us back. So we just in case we enjoyed it, we don't want to have things in a storage unit that would like require us to go back to the Bay Area. So anyway, we left in 2018, started in Chiang Mai, and upon landing in Chiang Mai, found out that being a digital nomad is a thing. Chiang Mai is one of my favorite cities because it has such a bustling digital nomad community. I then realized that there are so many other people just like us who are traveling, working online, and that was really cool. So that's where we started. We did a lot of traveling throughout Southeast Asia and Europe our first year. So we went from Chiang Mai to Bali to Tokyo, Berlin, Porto, and then got a little bit tired after hopping around and going to a new city every month. So then for the second year, we went back to Chiang Mai, which is kind of like our home base. And then we slowed down for 2 to 3 months at a time the following year. So we then did Taipei, Medellin, back to Chiang Mai, and then kind of getting close to where we are today. For our third year, we kind of wanted to slow it down even more and find more of a home base. We didn't get to spend too much time in Europe. As Americans, we could only really stay in like the Schengen area for 3 months out of every 6 months. So we wanted to explore more of Europe, and that kind of aligned. That was one part. And secondly, we were just looking for a longer term base where we could, stay maybe like 6 to 8 months out of the year and then travel for the rest. And that's how we came across the Portugal D7 visa, which is really actually ends up being really popular with digital nomads. But basically, if you have your own income coming from outside of Portugal, where at the time the income from the web design business qualified, you could get a long-term visa in Portugal. So we applied for our visas, got here in February 2020, which is a very interesting time to move to a new city, new country. And then, we've been here for 2 years now.
Amazing. Well, I want to touch on one key thing that you talked about that deeply resonates with me, which is when you started your journey, you started in Chiang Mai, and you talked about starting in a hub where there are lots of other like-minded people or lots of other like-minded digital nomads. And that's something that I felt was really important in my digital nomad journey too. I started in Bali and then went to Chiang Mai. I think starting in a place with lots of other nomads is so much easier because you're around other people who are going through very similar experiences and journeys. And those places, including Lisbon, the places that are popular with nomads are popular for a reason. And it's usually because they're great, they're easy. So I really want to emphasize and highlight that point because I think it's so important for anyone who's starting on their nomad journey.
I completely agree with that. Having a solid community is so important and makes all the difference. I'd say as a nomad starting out in Chiang Mai set us up in such a good way compared to if we had visited Tokyo first, where we met no one. It isn't very popular with digital nomads. And to add to what you said, the cities that are popular with digital nomads are popular for a reason. So typically they'll have a very affordable cost of living. It's really easy to get around without a car. So it's either a very walkable city or they have a really good public transit system. There's a good density of coffee shops to work out of, good restaurants, co-working space options as well.
Yeah. And for anyone listening, maybe we can list off some cities. I'll start and maybe you can carry on the list. But the hubs that come to mind for me, Medellin, Colombia, Playa del Carmen, Mexico, probably maybe even Mexico City, Chiang Mai, Bali, Ho Chi Minh City, Bangkok, Lisbon, the Canary Islands, probably Fuerteventura and Tenerife. Any to add to that list?
I would add Berlin, mostly in the summertime. Porto is also really cool in Portugal. They're trying to put Madeira on the map, which is an island in Portugal. It's a little bit harder to get to because you need that extra flight, but they have the fastest internet in Portugal. And some budding digital nomad communities as well.
Love it. Love it. Tell me a bit about your business, about transitioning, maybe even your business journey. When you started, you were running this agency. You've since transitioned into this more Portugal-focused, visa type business. Tell me about that evolution, switching into this new business. Tell us a bit about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So the web design business, we focused on Squarespace websites for entrepreneurs or small businesses. I was the main designer, and it was really the business was very focused. I think the biggest lesson that we learned from running that agency, that web design agency, was learning how to productize our services, and that's how we differentiated ourselves as a Squarespace web design agency. The biggest challenge with a web design agency was scaling. I think with any creative business, as you continue, unless you develop courses or digital products, as you continue to build websites, it's really hard to scale that same level, same quality level and aesthetic when it's spread across different designers. So that was our biggest challenge with the web design business. So actually we kind of went through a few, we ran it for a good number of years, about 4 or 5 years with me plus maybe a designer or two, but I was still always the main designer and remained to be active on every single project. Upon realizing that, just figured that it's kind of we'd like to run a business that didn't involve our active effort in every project, or that was more scalable, so to speak, where we could build a team and be able to step away from the business for a little bit when we wanted to. And so those were kind of the lessons from Design Stack, which is the name of our web design business. But independently, what my husband, when I say we, it's Richard and I, because we've been working together from the very beginning on Design Stack and on a bunch of other projects as well. I guess like after we realized that, Design Stack would be mostly kind of just like between the two of us, it's a great like source of income. It's stable, it's flexible. We can kind of like turn it on and off, scale up and down just between the two of us when we wanted. But it was a really good foundation or stream of income where that would allow us to test other business ideas. So we're always tinkering whenever we spot opportunities or experience like certain pain points. We just like love like, testing things. So for the past I guess year and a half, we've been working on some like side projects. And last year, I guess late 2020, we read the book Make by Peter Levels. And we were inspired to do like 12 startups in 12 months, where we wanted to focus more on like launching our ideas. Because we found that we'd like test a bunch of things, but it would never really go beyond kind of like sharing with family and friends. And so, we'd like work on this thing, share it, maybe not get such good feedback, and then kind of like let it die and then move on to the next thing. So our resolution for 2021 was that we were going to, just like be more thoughtful and more deliberate about putting ourselves out in public and putting our ideas out in public. That idea was what is now Border. But it was basically a service, like a productized service, where we help people get their tax ID. So just a little backstory, when anyone moves to Portugal, just like ourselves, you have to get a tax number as part of either to get your residency, or now like they're requiring it even earlier in the process to get your visa application, to submit your visa application. So we created a service that just helps you get your tax ID easily by like filling out a form, completing payment online, and then receiving your number in a few days. So we launched this idea in January 2020. For the first time, we reached out to more than just friends and family. We actually reached out to some YouTubers who were publishing content on moving to Portugal, because we were like, oh, this seems like a really relevant offering for these content creators. And we got really good responses. They were like, a handful of them, like more than half of them responded. A lot of them invited me to hop on their channel and talk about the NIF, because they get questions asked all the time. People ask them for help, but they have nowhere to point people. They have nowhere to point their audience. So basically we did that. And since then it's kind of taken off. And now Border is what we both do full time. The web design business is kind of on hold now because Border is all consuming, super exciting. There's like so much to do in Portugal. And so anyway, I keep going on. I can kind of stop it there.
Love it. Well, yeah, no, that's a great initial dive. I think one thing that you said that I want to emphasize and something that has been a key part for my journey as well is I think figuring out, I've been on a similar journey to a certain degree as an entrepreneur, where you have like one business, creates stable income, but you realize it's sort of capped out, but that stability gives you the freedom to explore other opportunities. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that can also be powerful even if you have like a day job, but just having a stable income and then using your free time to really explore and aggressively hunt and look for new opportunities and level up, I think is very underrated. And whether you're doing that as a freelancer or as an employee, I think that concept is super valuable.
I'm totally with you on that. In terms of if you have that stability, then it doesn't limit, I guess you're kind of more you basically open up the possibilities for ideas and opportunities that you can explore, because you're not trying to make a living out of the thing that you launch, right? Because you have your stable income. So that's kind of that. And then you can focus, you can be more creative and have less pressure in launching those new ideas.
Yeah. And I've also found on my own journey that building an initial stable business, even though it wasn't a big business, gave me a huge amount of confidence of okay, I can do this. I can take something from scratch and turn it into something. And it's okay, if I could do that, then if I pick the right thing, I can build it to a much higher level. So I feel like there's a lot of confidence and skill building that comes with that journey of doing something that hits a ceiling and then going for something to take it to the next level.
Totally. Yeah. It's so empowering. And also you realize that a lot of it is just practice and getting the reps. And like, the more you try and the more things you like, everything that you learn from one carries over to like the next idea and the next. So yeah, definitely kind of like getting those repetitions in.
Yeah. And on that point, what you just said resonates with me deeply, because I feel like you can read about entrepreneurship and you can think about it and you can work for a company, but the skill of like starting and running a business, you're going to learn the most by starting and running businesses, like by literally doing it is where
there's no other
most
way.
of the learning.
No other way to learn, because it's never, you run into issues that you can never read about, or you don't truly understand unless you're in that situation yourself. Because it's one thing to like take the learnings and take like the bits of wisdom from other entrepreneurs who have like successfully run businesses versus like deeply like internalizing how to solve problems, and just like being empowered that like, you're confident that when faced with a problem, you'll be able to overcome it.
Yes, totally agree. Well, tell me more about your thoughts as you've transitioned from, let's say, more of a service business to more of a, I think, kind of productized type business, or a business where you're not deeply in the operations and the like day-to-day execution of said service. How has your thinking and your approach to thinking about scaling, to building teams, like how has that evolved, and what have been some of your big learnings?
Yeah, it's been really cool to finally be like, so our service, I guess like Border, it still offers services. They are productized services, and we do handle a lot of it through automations and through like the vendors and partners that we work with. But the biggest shift for me has been being able to work on the business rather being working in the business, which is what it was like in the web design business. Because like, I'd say like in Design Stack, I would probably spend like 80-90% of my time working in the business, managing projects, coordinating with clients, like, hopping on sales calls, all those things. And maybe like 10% was like for everything else, versus now, I'm still like involved in the operations, but not in like the fulfillment of every single order. So it's definitely given me the space to kind of like take a step back, focus more on like partnerships and marketing, be able to like hire people and launch new initiatives and just like work on things that will help build the business.
Love it. Well, I want to shift back a little bit to general travel thoughts, and then we can go a bit deeper into Portugal and Lisbon and get more of your thoughts there. One thing you talked about in the rapid fire intro that I've also thought a lot about is like travel speeds and slowing down. So tell me about your journey. It sounds like in your first year or so of travel, you were traveling pretty quickly. Then you slowed down to like a 2 to 3 month pace, and then now you've put down some deep roots. Tell me about why you slowed down.
So I guess when you're doing it for the first time, like when we planned for that first year of traveling, it seemed like a month would be really long. Because when you compare it to like, the typical like 1 to 2 week vacation, we were like, oh, a month, that's plenty. So that we kind of like, I guess that's what set the pace for the first year. Diving right into it, you quickly realize that a month is actually really short when you're trying to live and work in a place, because you have to there's so many things that like come with living in a city compared to just like vacationing. You need to figure out like a good work setup, how to get groceries, where to do your laundry, where to exercise, just like all the basics. And then because you're not going home, then the second half of your time in a place is also spent kind of like planning for the next city that you're going to be going to. So I guess there's kind of like the period of settling in and then that period of preparing for the next city. And so a month proved to be like quite short for me personally. Extending to like 2 to 3 months, what I would say is like a much more comfortable pace. 3 months ideally. I think that's like the sweet spot of like having enough time where you feel like you really get to know the city. You don't feel pressured, where like, you can take some weekends where you just stay in because you have so many days to explore. You also get to spend more time with the people in that city because you're not just kind of like in and out in a few weeks. And then I guess now, so we went from like 3 months in every place, but then sometimes you like really like a place and maybe you want to stay for a little bit more. That's mainly what we found to be challenging. As a tourist, it's like really hard to get tourist visas that last for more than 3 months. And that's what ultimately led us to look for a place that would grant us like a longer term visa where we would have the option to stay for longer. Not to say that we wouldn't continue to travel, although COVID has kind of changed that a little bit. But yeah, looking for more of like a home base for 6 to 8 months and then traveling for the remaining kind of like 3 to 4 months out of the year is what we had planned to do in 2020, but maybe we'll get to do that soon.
Yeah, and I'm definitely on the same page. When I started, I mean, I've been traveling now for 5 years. The first year and a half, I was doing 1 to 2 months, which I realize is quick. And then I've since slowed down to trying to do like 3 to 6 months. But with a similar plan as you, where I plan to have Bali as a home base and spend probably like 8 to 9 months out of the year there and then travel the rest of the year. COVID has since made that a lot more complicated. Now I have a girlfriend. Right? Getting back to Bali hasn't been as straightforward, but that is my longer term plan. But I definitely feel a lot of things you're saying as far as when you're in a city for a short period of time, it's very emotionally draining. Well, that sounds negative. You end up spending, I think, a lot of brain power just like adjusting to the new habits, to the city, to intaking everything. Draining might not be the right word. It's very stimulating. There's so much stimulation.
I think that's the right word. Yeah.
If you're really trying to grow your business, you're having competing brain power between like the new experiences and what you're pushing towards from, let's say, a business side. So it's definitely a matter of, I think, priorities. And then after a certain point, I sort of have started to feel like I'm sort of floating in the abyss and I'm not like grounded in one place with deep relationships in one place. And so definitely a craving of wanting to go deeper and wanting to like have a true community where you are.
Kind of to build on what you said, there's something so nice about returning to a city that you know. It sounds like for you, that's Bali. For me, that's Chiang Mai. Like throughout our journey, we've come home to Chiang Mai on multiple occasions. And it's just so nice to like have that sense of like, oh, when you arrive in the city, you know exactly, you know your spots, you know how to navigate the city. So then you don't have that extra overhead of trying to figure out like how to live. And you're able to balance being able to like focus on your business as well as experience the city and the people that come with it.
Yes. Yeah. I totally agree with that. I sort of have I call it my rule. I think it's like a 3 and 30 rule where I'm generally trying to stay in a place under 3 days or more than 30 days. In the middle is sort of like no man's land. You're not there long enough to get into a groove. But you are there long enough where you're like burning a lot of time. It's like, yeah, it's just like it's a difficult in between time. But I think the exception to that rule is places that you know well and where you feel comfortable. You can hit in that. For me, at least, I feel like I can hit in that in between. Like when I go home, I can go home for a couple of weeks because it's like I already know what to expect. There are new levels to the experience, but it isn't really. It isn't overly stimulating where I can still be in a good groove.
I agree. I like that 3 or 30 rule. I found that my husband and I were like, oh, we really want to plan a trip sometime, like maybe after we get our booster shot, and travel somewhere within Europe. And so we were either deciding to do like, oh, maybe we should like drive to Spain and do like a little road trip, or we should fly somewhere. And we're like, okay, if we fly somewhere, then we should stay there for a month, right? Like to a new place that we've never been to before, because we got to make it. Yeah, it's either one or the other.
Yeah, well, it's like if you do 2 weeks, it's like it's so off. It makes me feel very off kilter.
Yeah. And then you're like so exhausted at the end of it.
Well, it's like you just found a restaurant you like, you just found a cafe you like, and then boom, you're off to the next place and you're doing the same search again. It's a whole thing. Well, I want to shift doing a deep dive on Lisbon and Portugal as a whole for digital nomads. Before we get there, I guess probably two final questions for you. One would be, what would 15-year-old you say about your life now?
15-year-old me would be very proud, somewhat surprised, but proud. I think that like as a teenage, like in my younger years, I was very much kind of like following that traditional path of like what was expected of like my family and like in the culture. Like, I guess just to make that concrete, like ever since I was in high school, I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer just like my grandfather and I'm going to take over his firm one day. And that was the plan. And you can see that where I'm at now is just like a complete opposite of that.
Cool.
But I couldn't be happier and I couldn't imagine life in any other way.
And then last question before we shift would be anything that we haven't already touched on that you want to make sure to emphasize, to share, any lessons, advice, anything?
Pretty much touched on it, but I guess if there's one thing to touch on, to like emphasize, if I haven't already, I guess it was in the rapid fire, but basically that, you know, that everyone has their, like, basically to like go and do your thing and have the confidence and the courage to do your thing. It's like really daunting. And I guess this ties into like just your previous question where like sometimes it feels like you can't, like there are like other people's expectations or maybe your expectations of yourself that hold you to where you currently are. Even though you have this like hunger or craving or just like desire to do something different. And I guess my one advice is to go for it. Of course, like responsibly and with planning. Basically just to like not hold yourself back.
Well, great. Let's shift to Lisbon, Portugal for digital nomads. Give me your general thoughts, pros and cons, things that people should know when they're thinking about going to Lisbon.
Oh, so many things. It is nice and blue and sunny outside, even though it's the 1st of February. It must be like 14 degrees. Portugal has like generally just like really good weather all year round, which I think is one of like the biggest things that it has going for it. In that, you kind of like don't need, I think at least when I was starting my digital nomad journey, we were kind of like chasing summer. We didn't have much luggage space, so we didn't want to pack like heavy clothes. And so we were always kind of like looking for that sweet spot of like 21 degrees if possible. And so I guess like, it's a little bit colder right now, but generally Lisbon's really mild. The people are super friendly, super warm and welcoming. The level of English, especially in the bigger cities, is really good. So it's really easy to get around as a foreigner. It definitely helps if you like speak a little bit of Portuguese, but generally you won't really have much trouble. The Wi-Fi is really good, infrastructure is good, public transportation. It's popular with nomads for a reason. And I think it's like a really good base to be in Europe as well. With a pandemic that's, I guess, a little like haven't seen much of that or haven't experienced it. But when I do look on Google Flights occasionally to like plan for future trips, there are so many like budget flights all around Europe coming from Lisbon because it's a major airport.
And any cons? I heard a lot of positives. Any cons to note?
Lisbon is affordable for Western Europe, but it's still a little bit more expensive compared to like popular digital nomad cities in, let's say, like Southeast Asia or South America. So I'd say that could be viewed as a con. One thing to be wary of when living in Lisbon, so because the temperature is like fairly mild all year round, I would say that a lot of the apartments here are not built for the winter. But it does get decent, it does get decently cold, like 11, 10 Celsius. And so if you're in an older apartment, the tendency is that there's likely no heating and pretty poor insulation. So that's one thing to be aware of. That could, I guess like in terms of housing options, especially for the winter time, they're not like built for the winters. And we personally experienced that.
Got it. So are you patching it together with space heaters and blankets?
Well, it was really interesting. Well, yeah, it's definitely a space heater. Well, now we've been traveling around with a space heater just in case. The apartment that I'm referring to specifically was like a beautiful apartment that was like this wide open space, but as a result was like really hard to heat. So,
Got it.
so that was a little bit of a challenge.
Got it.
A lot of the newer builds have heating though.
That makes sense. So you said that the Wi-Fi is good. Tell us a little bit more about the Wi-Fi. I mean, I imagine for anyone in the US, Lisbon, would you say it's similar to the US, or widespread? Wi-Fi is pretty widespread in like cafes and it's easy to find fast Wi-Fi where you're living and things like that?
Totally. So getting fiber is standard. We just moved into a new apartment like 2 weeks ago. And in terms of like hooking up or getting internet set up, like we have like 500 down, 100 up. And that's just like a pretty like standard plan. Going to, I guess like during the time that we've been here, we haven't really worked outside in coffee shops and stuff. So it's a little bit hard to say in terms of like working speeds, like taking video calls in a coffee shop. I don't think I've ever done that in the past 2 years. But generally speaking, like Wi-Fi is like really accessible and it's not an issue.
And then cost of living, give us a sense, apartments, food, other things. What should people expect from a cost of living perspective?
Yeah, so I'd say if like you're renting your own apartment, in Lisbon would be the most expensive city because it's the capital. You're probably looking at about 1,000 to 1,500 euros for your own apartment. If you're open to like sharing maybe like a co-living space or like a shared apartment where you're renting a room, I think that would go for maybe around like 800 euros or a little bit less, maybe a little bit under 800 euros. In terms of food, groceries are really affordable and the produce in Portugal is very, very good. So that's really nice. Eating out, I would say eating out for lunch is the best deal. They have this concept of like prato do dia, which typically is it's like plate of the day, and it'll typically be kind of like a set menu where they might they'll include like bread, a main, a drink, sometimes coffee, sometimes dessert, and that's typically like a set price. So you can get that at like a local eatery, nothing fancy, just like where the locals eat. That would go for like 8 to 10 euros for a meal, and so that's during lunchtime. Yeah. I think eating out for dinner is a little more expensive because then you don't have those deals anymore. So I'd say like eating out like a normal dinner, probably like 20 euros, 20 to 30, based on where you're eating. So I think generally food is like pretty affordable. If you just manage between like cooking and like eating out during lunch mostly, then it's a good deal. Other costs, transportation is really affordable as well. There's a good metro in Lisbon and in Porto. There are metros that run through the city. It's typically like €1.50 per way. Otherwise, like ride shares like Uber and one of the local ones here called Bolt. I'd say average cost is probably around €3 per ride. Never really goes above 5. And then the city, Lisbon and Porto are also very walkable. So I'd say most of the time I actually walk everywhere.
And then my only follow-up question there would be on the apartment pricing. Is that a long-term rental? Is that Airbnb? Like what for the 1,000? I think you said 1,000 to 1,500. Yeah, is that what context is that?
That would be for Airbnb. Well, okay, maybe I'd increase it a little bit for Airbnbs. You can find places, like we have stayed in places that are about 1,000. In the middle, like 1,200 euros Airbnb rate, mostly during the winter time. One thing that's really important to know about Portugal is that in the summer, everything is like 2 to 3 times the price. So I guess these rates that I'm giving are mostly like low season, shoulder season. In the summer, you'd expect to pay like 2, 3, 4,000 for like an Airbnb in the heart of the city. But yeah, I'd say that 1,000 to 1,500 could get you an apartment, like a 1-bedroom apartment on Airbnb.
Got it. And then what are the best, and let's say, I feel like you're not going to say they're worst, but what are the high season and low season months? Like what are the best and most popular and least popular months?
So high season, summertime would be like June, July, August, September. Those would be like the most expensive months to be in Portugal, but also the best weather is like the warmest time of the year. So if I were to recommend people to come, live for a few months, I would recommend 2-3 months on either side of that. So whether that be April, May, or like October.
Got it.
Because then you still get like pretty good weather, but then the prices are a lot more reasonable.
Got it. And then you mentioned, and I've also heard this, even though I've never really been to Lisbon, but the digital nomad community and expat community is very vibrant. Tell me a little bit more about that. Are there a lot of meetups? Are there co-working spaces? Like, how do you tend to meet people?
That's what I've heard as well. I'd say that my experience of Lisbon has been very unique in that we arrived like right before the pandemic. There was a multi-month lockdown, and then just like being someone who errs on like, I'm just like more cautious. Like we literally have not been to like we went to one meetup in February 2020, but after like since COVID, like I haven't been to any meetup or any events. So I don't have much to share about the digital nomad community in Lisbon. I've also heard really good things, and I am very hopeful and looking forward to meeting more people this year, hopefully.
Fair enough. And then nightlife. What would you say about the nightlife in Lisbon? Well, I'll change that. What have you read online about the nightlife in Lisbon?
Okay. I'm sorry, Kim. I'm like not
I'm not
able to give the full picture.
I'm sure you have the proximity. I'm sure you hear music and you got, so what do you think? What are your thoughts on the nightlife? What's expected?
I've heard that it's very vibrant. There's this one neighborhood called Barrio Alto. I've walked through it in the past, I've walked through the neighborhood a few times, but have never seen it in its full glory. But I've heard that it's like really popular for people who are like traveling to, it's like popular for tourists, for young people. There are a lot of bars. It's like narrow streets. People kind of go. There are a lot of bars to hang out in, and just like this whole little neighborhood grid is just like alive. I've never experienced it, but that's what I've heard.
Awesome. And then as far as neighborhoods, are there, and obviously this is a personal thing, different people are going to like different things, but are there popular recommended neighborhoods? Are there neighborhoods to avoid? What should someone know who's thinking about booking a place there?
Yeah, so some popular neighborhoods for nomads would be Príncipe Real, Santos, São Bento. Those three are all kind of like near each other. It's pretty central. It's not like in the commercial. It's not like in like the super touristy area. It's like just a little bit off. It's like very good location, and there's just like a lot of like coffee shops, restaurants, easy access to things. And then there's Campo de Rique, which is a really popular neighborhood more to the west of the city. That one's more contained. I'd say it's more popular with families, but it's also very beautiful. You kind of have like everything you need. The main downside to that neighborhood is that it doesn't have easy access to public transportation. So you need to walk quite a bit to like access the metro, and they don't really have like buses running through. So that would be the only con to that.
And then, since this is your expertise, give us a crash course on the visa options in Portugal, and maybe even just tell us a bit about what problem you guys are solving and how you're helping.
Totally. Yeah. So I'd say that the most popular visa option for digital nomads would be the Portugal D7 visa. It's originally designed for retirees, basically people living on their own income. So I'd say traditionally that would be like pension, social security, investments. But these days, if you're earning money online for as long as it's not from a Portuguese employer, then that will qualify as income for the D7. The minimum income that you have to show is right about 8,000 euros per year. So I think it's like very achievable. I'd say that's the main requirement. And then when you're applying for the visa through your consulate, the other kind of like main requirements would be to be able to show a lease or proof of accommodations when you get here. Nowadays, in the past year, they've been requiring that you show a NIF, which is a Portugal tax ID, and a Portuguese bank account ahead of time. we found that in the past few months, the requirements have gotten a little bit stricter. Like for example, when we applied, we only needed to get the tax ID and the bank account once we got to Portugal. But now that, let's say in America, especially, a lot of the consulates are requiring that you have these two things ahead of time. And that's what makes it really challenging, because like, how do you open a Portuguese bank account without being in Portugal? And it's not as convenient as like in the States, where like a lot of the banks are digital and like fully online. So basically we help with those two pieces. So the first is the tax ID, which I touched on a little bit earlier, but basically we just help facilitate the process of getting that. So everything is fully online. Basically you just like fill out a form, give us your passport, a copy of your passport, proof of address, and then we get your NIF in under a week. And then secondly, for the Portuguese bank account, we also facilitate that process and open your account with one of the biggest private banks here in Portugal. So you get that set up, you'll have online access, you can fund it, and then you'll need to show that as part of your visa application.
Got it. And then to plug for anyone who's interested in using your services, what is the URL that they should go to?
Yeah, so check out our website. It's border.io. That's BORDR.io.
Awesome. Well,
Kathleen, I wanted to share one more thing. Sorry.
Go for it.
Just for the D7 visa. Basically, when you get that visa, you are allowed to stay in Portugal. I mean, like, it's a long-term visa, so you can stay throughout the whole year. But to maintain residency, you basically have to stay around 8 months every year. And then after holding your Portuguese residence for 5 years, you're eligible to apply for Portuguese citizenship or permanent residency. So it's also really popular for people who are looking to have like a second passport or second residence, to have more access to the Schengen area.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing everything, both about Lisbon and your journey. And it's been great to have you on here.
Totally. It was so much fun.
For anyone who wants to follow your journey, stay in touch, any social medias you want to plug beyond, there's border.io for anyone who wants the Portugal help, but any social medias to plug?
Ooh, I am not.
Or contact forms on the website.
Maybe I can give you my email, but I don't know if we want that on a blog post.
You can go to border.io and hunt down the contact form. That might be, sounds like that might be the best one here.
And then I'll get in touch.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your time and thanks for doing this.